Evening, everyone. So, first of all, apologies. There was no 5 o'clock video today. There was a 5 o'clock video. It was accidentally scheduled for tomorrow, so it's going to have to be tomorrow now. But what I want to talk about now, someone has just mentioned in the chat the Henley plot. This is something that was published in the Telegraph. I'm going to come back to that, if you don't mind, because it is absolutely hilarious. But what I want to go over is just how the budget has changed things in terms of the path to the election, because there's been a few things you wouldn't have necessarily noticed unless you follow a lot of Tory shills in the media, basically. But if I'm going to share something with you, because this just highlights just how bad the budget was. Because you may look at it and you think, well, there's nothing really in it. It's not really impressing people. No, it's not. And that's an absolute disaster. So I saw something. It actually made me laugh out loud. And it was quite spectacular. I'd just finished doing the agenda with Graham Hughes on the Labour Social channel. And I was talking to him afterward, and then I just suddenly started laughing. So I'd say what I was laughing at. And it was this. It's in two parts, this. So Dan Hodges, if you don't know who he is, Mail on Sunday. I don't know what he is anymore. He used to be like the political editor. I'm not sure if he still is. But he writes for the Tory client media. He was the one who was pushing, the sort of Curry gate for 2 weeks solid a couple of years ago for the local elections. So good old Tory shill. But unlike some of the others, he does at least concede when he's got something wrong. So he's not the worst of them. So anyway, this is what he tweeted. This is yesterday. So this is after the budget. And not only after the budget, but after it's possible to judge public reaction to the budget. So Dan Hodges says, the narrative was that as we approached the election, the polls would narrow. 1 year ago, Labour had a 19-point poll lead. Today, it has a 20-point poll lead. And this is what's hilarious. So I was straight away thinking, hang on a minute, you were one of the ones pushing this idea that actually Labour's lead was soft and it was going to come down, and come the election year, people would change their minds. Someone pointed this out to him. So this is the second half. So someone says to him, you were very happy to take part in that narrative a year ago. Dan Hodges says, can you give me an example? Someone posts 2 of his tweets doing just that, and he has to just go, fair enough. It's like he can't even remember that there's evidence that he was pushing this narrative himself. I absolutely burst out laughing. But this is what's happening now. This is what's happening. You've now got Tories in the media. It's like they colluded in this illusion themselves. It's like they thought that there was this big bank of conservative voters who were not involved in the polls, and suddenly when it gets close to, because there is a bit of a thing, as soon as you get really close to an election, yes, there are people who don't know who they're going to vote for, but they will vote, and they will vote for the party of government. They just don't think they should, or they don't think, they think, I can't really vote for this. But come the election, there will be a number who go, but it's better than somehow the opposition, right? But they just thought that they would, as soon as election year started, people started thinking more about the election, which people are. The campaign ramped up, which it has. The Tories are spending. The Tories are even advertising on my channel now. I'm getting told by people that Rishi Sunak is popping up on my bloody channel. So he's paying me even. I don't know how much. So it's insane. So there's all this campaigning going on, and people are getting now into the mindset of an election, and it's coming up to May, and there's plenty of people, the majority in the media are saying, oh no, we think autumn, but there's plenty of people pushing the idea it could be May. So people are thinking about the election, and yet the polls haven't narrowed. If anything, they're widening. And the Spectator also, for those who don't know, the Spectators are really nasty. At the last election, old Rod Liddle in the Spectator was urging its readers to literally lock up their not young, as in children who were adult and able to vote, but young, at the bottom end of it, 18, 19-year-olds. to literally lock them in their rooms to stop them voting, or feed them drugs. It actually advised feeding them drugs just so they wouldn't go out and vote. They were that desperate, and that's what sort of paper it is. They're shitting themselves as well now. You know, they're noting that the Spectator poll tracker gives an average of 6 pollsters to iron out blips and freaks. Tories have been through some bleak times of late, but only now does the poll of polls show support falling below 25%. And I will be fair to them, given that they select, because some poll of polls just take all major pollsters. The Spectator one is selective, and you think, oh, do they select the ones kindest to the Tories? Their selection's actually not bad. If I read him out, it's got it at the bottom. YouGov, one of the top ones. Redfield and Wilton are absolutely terrible, disastrous, but Ipsos Mori, good one. Salvation, decent. Savanta, not really. They're sort of hit and miss. Opinion, fairly decent as well. So, you know, they've got one really crap one in there and one that's not brilliant, but it's not a bad selection. And so, yeah, and the fact is the gap has widened. It's mad. What's Labour's approach to unemployment benefits and stuff like that? Well, their approach is to not tell people, tell someone on minimum wage at the Department for Work and Pensions that they get to overrule a GP as to whether anyone's fit to work. So in terms of like people who are unemployed, let's break it down, shall we, really quickly, because I want to get back onto this budget thing. First of all, you've got people who are too sick to work, right? Now, they're either just long-term sick, they just cannot work, or they could if they had medical treatment. The over 7 million long waiting list is not helping there. So if people have got an issue with people being off sick for work, make sure they can get fast medical treatment. I'm going to have to keep it at some point to put up. But I've mentioned it a few times. There's someone I know a few weeks ago broke their arm, properly broke it. The x-ray showed it in 2 complete bits. They went into A&E on a Saturday, told to go home with painkillers. They were not treated until the following Friday, 6 days later. In 2010, they'd have been sorted out straight away, right? That's the situation. So that person, apart from the fact he was in incredible pain over those 6 days, like literally crying with pain as you would, doesn't matter what painkillers they give you, he will have caused now more damage. That will take longer to recover. I mean, straight away, it took 6 days to even start treatment. So it would take longer to recover. That means he's going to be off work for longer. That's because we haven't funded the NHS properly. So you've got that. Then you've got people who are just not going to be able to work. I mean, I follow a few disability campaigners, but my favourite one's Joe Hardy, and he has cerebral palsy. He can't work. You can't give him a job. He can't work. And he's never going to be able to work in a normal job, or indeed even a vaguely normal job. Simply can't do it. So, Labour's position will be, make sure people who are off ill get the treatment they need. If it's nothing to do with illness, let's say it's just because people can't find a job. Training, investing in training, that's Labour's position as well. So it's really as simple as that. And when people talk about benefits, I would like people to remember that most benefits are paid to the wealthy. Millionaires take more in benefits than ordinary people. Can we remember that as well? Can we remember that you think about Eton, right? Eton College, posh private school, arguably the poshest private school there is, the one where the likes of David Cameron and Boris Johnson went to. Yeah. And you think, well, it's a private school, isn't it? It's a private school. It doesn't get public funding. It does get public funding. We pay out of the public purse. The taxpayer pays, I think it's 3 times as much for someone going to Eton as someone going to the local comprehensive school. Rich people get most of the benefits. It's just they don't call them benefits, but they are. So, hopefully Labour will knock those on the head. Anyway, I digress. Another one here. So what do I think of the Metro mayors? We're going all over the place today. Think they're a good idea. Do I think Labour will expand devolution, including increasing revenue raising powers and more block grant funding? So in terms of my attitude to Metro mayors, they are... I'm sort of neutral on them. I am very much in favour of more decision making taking place locally. In terms of elected mayors, obviously it works well in London. Andy Burnham's been decent in Greater Manchester as well. There's been a few others that are okay, but they're not universally popular. There are some that are disappearing just because the local public just think it just creates friction. So there is that. You can have a situation where, let's say, a particular mayor has very, very different political outlook to, the local councils or the local MPs. And you could say, well, it's a bit of a check and balance, but it's also a block to anything getting done. So I'm neutral on it. I think there are advantages and disadvantages. I don't really have a too strong a view. What I will say is that obviously we know Keir Starmer wants to make sure there's more decision making, particularly for investment. The problem when you have all investment decisions made in Whitehall, in London, is they naturally go, without being particularly biased or prejudiced, they naturally go, well, if we invest it round London, we're going to get a better return. And it's like, yeah, because you've already got brilliant infrastructure. But that doesn't help anywhere else catch up. If you want to help somewhere else catch up. So you need to give those other places the ability to decide their own decisions to an extent. You don't let the local councils completely loose, but to a certain extent. Johnson, I asked a few weeks ago what the chance the Lib Dems from the official opposition, said about 2 out of 10. Has this changed or still the same? No, it has very much changed. The bugger of it is I've addressed this exact thing in the video that was supposed to come out at 5 o'clock today, but it's 12 noon tomorrow. So here's the situation. The latest polling now is it could still, you expect it to change a bit during the general election campaign, but it is so disastrous. And if people can really turn on to the idea of, because I know there'll be some, this is the biggest counter for getting people to vote tactically. I don't think you have to persuade, there's some people who will never vote tactically, that's fine. But there are a lot of people, millions of people who are prepared to vote tactically to achieve what they would think is the better outcome, right? And there'll be, I worry that there'll be a lot of people thinking, well, it's just going to give Labour more seats, isn't it? It's like, yes, but it's going to reduce, tactical voting on a large scale this year, and it is going to be coordinated, really could beat the Tories down to 3rd or even 4th place. In fact, there is not a single Tory MP who is safe. Not one. In fact, I did in my video today, the one actually did come out, which is a very long one, I'm afraid. I did make the point. So I had a list, for those who didn't watch it, I had a list of 10 Tory MPs. One of them's technically not anymore, it's Lee Anderson. 10 Tory MPs, some in safe seats, some in not so safe seats, and I discussed how you can get rid of all of them. And although, in theory, Rishi Sunak was the safest of them, Kemi Badenoch arguably is the safest. What I would call a safe Tory at the moment is not one that's sitting on a really large majority, because they're gone. It's one where it's not obvious who the tactical vote is. So in Rishi Sunak's constituency, Richmond, it is obvious. Labour are well ahead of everyone else. It's really clear the tactical vote there is Labour. In Kemi Badenoch's constituency, remember there's boundary changes. Saffron and something silly, I don't remember. But in her constituency, it's Labour are looking at the YouGov MRP poll, Labour are the closest, but the Lib Dems are just behind, and you can't really tell. So what you would need to do to remove Kemi Badenoch, you'd first of all have to get everyone there recognising, yes, she can be removed. But second, you have to say, right, you all need to back one candidate. And the genuine tactical voting sites like stopthetories.vote, sign up to that, will probably not give their advice until very close to the election date. They won't be able to call it this far out. So there will be some seats at the moment you cannot get tactical voting advice because it's not clear who that is. Those are the safest Tories because the tactical vote is probably going to be split unless the tactical voting campaigns really do very, very well in informing people. And one of the things we need to inform people is don't panic. Doesn't matter that you don't know who it is now. There will be some advice when you need to cast your vote. Just wait. For some seats, you'll have to wait very long. How fruitful would it be for Labour to push how they would have spent the non-dom windfall money versus the Conservatives using it for lacklustre Northern Ireland national insurance cut? I think so. In fact, another way that the budget has been an utter disaster for the Tories, it's not just that you've got a lot of Tory shills who just had in their heads, oh, the polls are going to tighten, and they knew that the budget was the big thing. Because what else is there to come? Nothing else is to come. They know full well that even if Rishi Sunak gets refugees on the plane to Rwanda, they know it's not going to affect channel crossings. They know that. So unless he has some other plan to deal with channel crossings, and that's it. They know that the budget was it. That was it. It was the last big play and it's failed. It doesn't matter if they hang on till autumn and issue a mini budget statement. It's not going to help, because all it is daft promises. If the real budget hasn't persuaded people, how is a promise of something that might happen after the election going to be? But yes, but the biggest mistake they made was giving Labour a really easy attack line, because Labour are now, because Jeremy Hunt said in the long term he wants to see it's not national insurance contributions ending altogether. People keep reporting that. It's employee national insurance contributions. But that doesn't matter. That's still a hell of a lot of tax revenue he's pissing away. So Labour have straight away come out and go, oh, how are you going to afford this £46 billion then? Because that's what they say it'll cost. The Institute for Fiscal Studies say it'll cost 40 odd billion. So the 46 is certainly not going to be far off. Where are you going to get the money from? Rishi Sunak's been asked. Where's the money come from? And that's what Labour need to do more, because at the drop of a hat, if Labour announce anything at all to do with tax and spend policies, how are you going to pay for it? How are you going to pay for it? Instantly. How are you going to pay for it? So when the Tories do it, they need to. The media don't do the same thing, but Labour have got a really easy in. After all, the Tories attacks Labour for potential £28 billion a year investment, and yet the Tories are just off the cuff saying, oh yeah, we want to get rid of £46 billion worth of taxes. It's like, well, where does the money come from? Where does the money come from? So yes, Labour already hammering on that, and they absolutely should have said as well, or should be saying, shall I say? Obviously, there's still time. This national insurance cut works out at this amount of money for a month for an average worker. Not very much. We would have spent it on this. I mean, the the non-dom status was going to go to breakfast clubs. What else? There was something else as well. Something to do with healthcare, was it? Can't remember. But, they certainly should plug that as well. But anyway, go on. I've just reminded again. Leanna was saying, I'd celebrate with a cheeky rum and coke or something if both Patel and Braverman are no longer Tory MPs. There was there was someone on Twitter saying that they've changed their mind. They were on election night going to have a drink every time a Tory MP lost the seat. They said they don't think they'll do that now. And I actually replied to them, well, if you did, you'd hopefully be the last person the Tories killed. Because, yes, no human can survive that much alcohol. But unless it was just a swig of a pint or something, even then you would get very drunk. But anyway, right, let's go back to this Henley thing then, the Henley plot. So, because I find this hilarious. So the Telegraph, the secret plan for Boris to take back the Tory party. Now, I haven't fully read the article yet, but I was going to do a video on it tomorrow, so I haven't got round to reading it all yet. However, can I just say this? Hold on, let's get rid of this. And let us put up I'm going back to this MRP poll from, if I can find it. There it is. This MRP poll from YouGov. I'll zoom in a little bit there. So hopefully you can see that. I'll read it out anyway, even if you can't. So this is the MRP poll that YouGov did. The field work was done over December. Remember, the situation's got worse for the Tories since then. So these polls flatter the Tories. So Henley and Thames. So this is where Boris Johnson lives at the moment. So without me knowing the details, the Henley plot will be basically getting Boris Johnson, the candidate, the MP for Henley, who's the guy who took over from Boris Johnson. So Boris Johnson was the MP for Henley. Then he stood down to become Mayor of London. This other guy took the place. Then when Boris Johnson finished being Mayor of London, he went off to Uxbridge, right? So now Boris Johnson's living in Henley. So he's got his big mansion in Henley, right? Huge house with a moat and everything. And the MP for Henley is stepping down at the next election, which instantly says, oh, Boris Johnson will probably be the candidate. But here's the thing. If you look at this, and this is from December, basically. It was published in January, but the data was collected in December. And it has the Lib Dems taking it already. So without even a major push on tactical voting. And so already it would look like Boris Johnson would lose. So here's the thing. Now, MRP, I keep saying MRP polling doesn't take account of like local wrinkles. So if you have a particularly popular candidate, they can boost their own party's fortunes. If you have a deeply unpopular candidate, they can reduce them. Boris Johnson is not popular. I think if Boris Johnson were to stand in that seat, I think there would be a greater level of tactical voting. I don't think Johnson can win that seat. Looking at this, I would be happier, admittedly, if I could see another big MRP poll a few months later, but obviously they cost a lot of money. I think there was one published last month, but I saw so many, good pollsters rubbishing it. I just didn't even bother looking at it myself. So unfortunately, this is the best we've got. But at the same time, it's YouGov. They are really good at MRP. In fact, they are the masters at it. Or they have been over the last couple of elections. And things have got worse for the Tories. And Boris Johnson's, all these backers, all the people in the Tory party, they think of him as this like election winning machine. He's not. He won. The reason why he won the elections he did, I mean, to an extent, yes, he also had opponents who messed up, but but it's because he got the best strategic advice. He had the best strategists who molded his personality. The Boris Johnson, remember, Boris Johnson is not really Boris Johnson, it's Alex Johnson, right? Boris Johnson is a character that he plays. And he has developed this character over many years with paying for strategists to advise him. But the character's broken now. Partygate broke it. And yes, he'll still have some supporters, but by and large, he's now unpopular. He's not going to win Henley. So this Henley plot, and I don't know whether it's supposed to be for after the election. I've not read it far enough. I don't know whether it's before or after the election. Because before, you could argue the MP could just step down, trigger a by-election, Boris Johnson stand. Although that's a bit dodgy because if Rishi Sunak is aiming for a May 2nd election, then the by-election will never take place because he'll be calling the election sometime this month. But, it's saying Reform might get a seat or two if voters stick it to the... No. The Reform won't get any seats. They can't get any seats. All they're doing is splitting the crazy votes. That's it. But the Green Party... The latest polling I saw has the Green Party winning a second seat. I know they're targeting a few. They may end up with none, but they could end up with two. So yeah, they really are in dire straits now. So going back to that, long time ago, that could the Lib Dems be the official opposition? Yes, and think about this as well. So imagine a scenario, and this has happened. This has happened before in other countries as well as this country with different parties. So let us imagine the Tories end up with about 20 MPs. The latest is, I think, about 25 MPs or 27 MPs with the YouGov. 25 with Ipsos, 27 MPs with UKIP. Either way, in third place. Could be fourth place. Because remember, these polls, when you put it through electoral calculus, they don't really take account of the SNP vote. So it makes us certain assumptions about the number of seats the SNP would win. But if we imagine a scenario where the Tories are absolutely crushed everywhere, but the SNP do reasonably well in Scotland, they could end up in fourth place, right? So in that scenario, the Lib Dems are the official opposition. Now, here's the thing, and I made this point in the video, which unfortunately didn't go out, but it will tomorrow. So the Lib Dems do quite well in local elections, right? Why? Because people think Lib Dems can win. They do win. They even take control of councils. So the Lib Dems are a valid choice in local elections because they can actually win. So people don't ever think, oh, there's no point voting Lib Dem, they can't win. Because they can win, and they do win. Same with Westminster by-elections. The Lib Dems are very good at attracting the protest vote. So they tend to win quite a lot of Westminster by-elections. They tend to flip straight back again in the general election, but they do tend to win them in by-elections. Why? Because people see them as credible. But people don't see them as, they're doing obviously some seats, but throughout most of the country, there's a lot of people who might support the Lib Dems who ultimately either vote Labour or the Conservative because they don't, the Lib Dems are never going to form a government. They can share power like they did in 2010, but they can't actually form a government. Well, if the Tories are beaten down to something like 25 seats, and it's not fanciful, by the way, that's plausible. I'm not saying it will happen, but it is plausible. If the Tories are beaten down to 25 seats and the Lib Dems are on something like 70 seats, which is, again, for the Tories to be beaten down to 25 seats, the Lib Dems are probably going to win about 70, 75 seats, right? For that to happen. So imagine then the following election, particularly if the Lib Dems really grow into being opposition. Let's say they do a good job of being not obstructive to popular policies, but holding Labour to account in government, right? So then the following election. Now, it will mean Labour will win a lot of Tory seats that are just going to flip straight back, right? Including maybe Rishi Sunak's seat, eh? Now, we imagine they'll flip straight back to the Tories, but what if they don't? What if voters go, hang on a minute, the Lib Dems might win this. The Lib Dems are credible. They have a better chance of forming a government than the Tories. They've got 3 times as many seats. You could actually end up in a situation where the Tories end up with, like, being destroyed. They could actually be destroyed. You know, you just look back to the Conservative government in Canada years ago. So I don't, there's ifs in this. I don't think it's likely because you need several things to be true. And the cumulative effect of those several things is probably not likely. But it is possible. And it starts off by making sure the Tories could end up with no seats. They could end up with no seats. I don't think that is realistic. I don't think you'll persuade enough swing voters willing to vote. If I just put this up here, willing to vote tactically, I don't think you'll get enough of them. But if I sort this according to, so these are in theory the safest, I've now done it in order in theory of the safest Conservative seats. In other words, on the MRP poll, the seats where the Conservatives had the largest lead. Now, Christchurch is an absolute classic, probably is the safest seat in the country because not only do they have a hefty lead, even with this MRP poll, but you can see here, well, I don't know whether you can see, Labour on 21, Lib Dems on 20. So you've got, again, it's like, who would be the tactical vote? Unless, as you get close to the election, one of them pulls ahead. And I'll be honest, neither Labour nor the Lib Dems are going to pump a load of resources into the fight in this seat. It's not going to be a target seat for anyone. So the only way the Tories lose this one is if Labour and the Lib Dems somehow come to an unofficial agreement as to which one's going to go for it, and whoever it is has a really strong local campaign. But this is an example of a genuinely safe seat. Brentwood and Ongar has a smaller thing, but also it's obvious this is clearly Labour. I mean, they're well ahead of anyone else. So you could imagine a lot of tactical voting taking that. Normally you would say 15-point lead, unless that's come right down come the election, probably not going to happen. But it would be worth it, and you would know who the tactical vote was. So I mean, but all of these, if you look at it, like this is the safest in many ways, and yet they're expected to get about 37% of the vote. Like there are seats at the moment where the Conservatives won over 50% of the vote. That's not happening here. Not one single seat. 40% is the highest on all of these seats. 40%. Stop building my hopes up. That all you need to do, well, not you personally, but all we need to do is if we just, there are people who will not vote tactically, right? They won't do it. That's fine. But there are enough people who will vote tactically to get rid of the Tories. If you can tell them, if you can persuade them that actually they could be wiped out, I think there's enough people to do it. It's just persuading them, because, you know, it's very difficult to persuade people who are used to the idea of most seats being basically safe. Really, elections flip on the movement of 50 to 80 seats, 100 usually at the most. You don't usually get much movement. It's like most seats in the country are basically safe. They're always going to vote the same way. The last time, 2019, was different. Labour lost a load, right? This year is going to be different. The Tories are going to lose even more. The Tories keep talking about they fear a 1997 style wipeout. They will be lucky to get a 1997 style wipeout. If they end up with results like 1997, they can think themselves lucky, because for that to happen, Labour will have had to have run a not particularly good campaign, and the tactical voting campaigns, which I will be helping to support, will have failed to get through to enough people. But, you know, we've got like Carol Vorderman on the job, and there's a few others famous people who may get on board with it as well. Christchurch was Lib Dem in the 90s. Yeah, all these things can flip. These things can flip. We've had seats flipping in by-elections that have been Tory for 200 years. I'm imagining Sunak winning the only Tory seat, then resigns as leader and an MP. Leadership is a runoff between his replacement and Cameron. That would be hilarious. That would absolutely be hilarious. Uxbridge was only held by 300 votes. I think it was a bit more than that. I think it was just under 500. But it was not many. It was not many. And that was down to a local issue, which Labour... And this is why I say, you know, Labour's campaign, I don't know how good it will be, because as far as I'm concerned, they messed up in Uxbridge. They should have muddied the waters, right? They should have said, yes, it's a Labour mayor pushing ULEZ, but it was a Conservative mayor who started it, and it was a Conservative Prime Minister who insisted that the Labour mayor carry on with it. Yeah? But Uxbridge will go back to Labour. Because now that ULEZ is out the way, I mean, people have seen, oh, it doesn't actually... I mean, I keep coming back to that image of someone who had a Tesla worried about the ULEZ charge. It's like, you don't understand ULEZ, do you? You know, like, if you think you'll be charged the ULEZ fee when you've got a Tesla, I mean, you could be charged a stop funding Musk fee, but we don't actually have any of those. But you will not be charged a ULEZ fee, a congestion fee. So, you know, but to think that you would be is like you didn't have the first clue, have you? And that's what often happens. You know, when a major policy's been rolled out, there is often a lot of opposition. And then you find, and I said this all last year, as soon as it's been implemented and people can see it for what it is, unless it was genuinely a bad policy, people just go, oh, because no one, like, only idiots would put in a policy that's going to be unpopular. Politicians need to remain popular, otherwise they lose. So politicians generally do not promote unpopular policies. I know you could look at the Westminster Tories, but they are idiots. And that's why the polls are as they are, if I get rid of this again and put this back up. That is why this has happened. I mean, look at it. I mean, when the Spectator were posting this, Dan Hodges actually chimed in again saying, soon the Tories will be wishing for the glory days of Liz Truss. In reality, I don't think the gap is ever going to open out like that, because then the Tories will not win a single seat. Gammon tried to convince me not to vote Labour because they'd bring ULEZ in here in 20-mile-an-hour zones. I fully hope they do so. I'm telling you so. Well, the 20-mile-an-hour zone is another funny one, because the after that thing, because these things are only really deeply unpopular. There's always some opposition, right? They're about 20% or something, but they're only deeply unpopular where they don't exist, which is mad, but it's because they don't know how it works. So in The Guardian this weekend, I was going to do a video on this. I may still do, get around to it. So the Tories decided to attack low traffic neighbourhoods. Only a government report, which they're not publishing, but according to The Guardian, you've seen a copy, someone's obviously leaked it, has concluded that they're actually really popular. That's why, I mean, we know that anyway, because that's why they dropped it. Because they were going to go on about, oh, we're going to make it harder to implement 20-mile-an-hour zone, stuff like that. And, oh, you were going to legislate for this. And then it was like the King's speech came and went, and there was no mention of it. They'd quietly dropped it because they'd had this report that says, yeah, they're actually really popular. And not just popular in general, popular with Conservative voters. So, yeah. What do the Scots polls currently look like? Okay, let me see if I can find one quickly. Can I haven't got one handy, I'm afraid, but I may be able to find one. I'm struggling, I'm afraid. I can find, I'm just looking at the same way as well with the poll of polls. I can find, no, I can't. I can only find one on like support for an independence referendum. That's the only Scotland one I can find, I'm afraid. I could get the YouGov ones up and look at the data tables on that, because actually it's worth putting this one up, because there was some spectacular stuff in the data. Let me hold on. Get rid of it. Oops, heck. Get rid of that. Get rid of that. I'll just put this up. I don't know how. I'll read it off anyway if it's too small to be seen. But in terms of specifically Scotland, this is the YouGov, the latest YouGov one. It has, it actually has the SNP on 29, Labour on 40. This is for the Westminster one, of course. Conservatives on 11. Obviously, there'll be a much smaller. Actually, in a proportion, it's not bad at all. But what I want to draw your attention to on the latest YouGov poll is this. So we're used to the idea, when you look at the different age groups, younger end support Labour way more than the Tories, and it slowly gets towards the Tories having more support in the older groups. But 18 to 24-year-olds, 68% Labour, 7% Conservative, and that's an improvement. A few weeks ago, it was 5% Conservative. 25 to 49s, that's me. 54 Labour, 14 Conservative. 50 to 64s, 43 Labour, 20 Conservative. But then 65 plus, 32 Labour, 33 Conservative. It's basically the same thing. It's effectively the same thing. So Labour are now, to all intents, they're slightly behind, but to all intents and purposes, let me get rid of that so I'm not chopping the top of my head off. To all intents and purposes, the Labour are now level pegging with elderly voters, according to YouGov anyway, which is spectacular. And this is the thing, like, you know, people look at, you know, again, I'll get rid of this and put the thing back up. People look at the overall trends on the polling, which you should look at overall trends, not snapshots. But that doesn't tell you the whole story. This doesn't tell you what's going on underneath the bonnet. Whereas if you actually look and you follow these things like I do quite regularly, I can see that the individual breakdowns are just getting worse for the Conservatives. It says, why are there some young Tories? They'll have money and Tory parents is why. They'll have money and Tory parents. These are people who do not suffer from Tory governments, or they don't see that they suffer from Tory governments. Remember, 7% is, in fact, ironically, it's exactly the same proportion who go to private school. I'm not suggesting every private school student in the country votes Conservative, but I'll bet you most of that 7% have gone to private school. In fact, it would be an interesting study to do, wouldn't it, if YouGov were to do that? But I would be willing to bet the vast majority of that 7% of 18 to 24-year-olds who say they'll vote Conservative went to private school. Derek saying that highly popular with the locals. As far as I understand, I've never complained about local roads going from 40 to 30 or 30 to 20. Usually congested, you can't drive at 30 anyway. Well, the thing, they are popular. And I mean, in this article from The Guardian, it was saying one of the arguments is people say, oh, it just shifts the traffic somewhere else. It's like, no, it doesn't. Because the whole point of it, there are people, right? So if I want to go to a local shop, there's a local shop, depends where I want to go, between 10 and 15 minutes walk, that's all. I just walk. There are people who drive. There are people, for the sake of a 10-minute walk, will drive to the shop. All it's about doing is about making it more of a pain in the arse to drive than it is to just bloody well walk. So it doesn't shift the traffic somewhere else. It's basically making people think, oh, I can't be arsed driving. It's not worth it. I'll just walk or take the bike. So it doesn't shift it somewhere else. It actively reduces the amount of unnecessary traffic. My nan just gets the basic state pension. She may have to fill in a tax return for the first time in her life. She's 90. Well, yeah, this is your fiscal drag, isn't it? It's the fact that, I mean, they haven't. That was the big thing, wasn't it? They were going to cut income tax. I am genuinely amazed they didn't. I'd love to know what the thinking on that was, because national insurance doesn't affect pensioners. If you're retired, you don't pay it. You don't pay it on a pension. So, I absolutely astounded that they would have, because I mean they're losing support amongst the elderly, and it's the easiest ones to get back, surely, for them. But what they've got is, yes, there are going to be pensioners who are going to pay more in tax. It's all right, Jeremy Hunt going on about the boost to the pension, which is a big boost, and I will say this: the Conservatives do tend to boost the state pension more than Labour because they're so dependent on those older voters. But at the same time, I would still argue a lot of them are better off under Labour because they can, how much might some of those pensioners be having to pay if they can afford it for private services, for things that would be available if local services were properly funded? Being able to see a doctor, for example. The young Conservatives like Darren Graham and the grifters, some of them have just been brought up. We all have prejudices that were basically instilled in us as children. We've all got them. It's nice to be mindful and to sort of challenge them in adulthood, but we've all got them. So some of them are just raised like that. I mean, I was raised by Conservative parents, but they weren't particularly political, so it didn't have much chance of rubbing off on me. Quite a few young Conservatives on GB News on a Saturday afternoon. I assume they're propped up by Tufton Street. Do you know, someone was pointing out recently, Sophie Corcoran, so she's another Darren Grimes type clone. And she, apparently, I've not checked her out. I assume someone got this on LinkedIn or something. She's put down that she's a Conservative campaign manager and has been since November 2023. A full-time Conservative campaign manager. I thought she was on GB News. This is news to me. Or is she just putting it down? Does she just help deliver a few leaflets and she's put down she's a campaign manager now? Bus service in my nan's village has all but collapsed over the last 15 years. Yeah, the figure is literally since 2010, the number of bus routes in this country in England has halved because transport is devolved. It's certainly devolved in Scotland. I'm not sure to what extent it's devolved in Wales. Wales doesn't have quite so much power as Scotland. But in England, the number of bus routes has halved since 2010. Putting out saying, I got into politics through Grandad at Labour. Got to say, hearing you talk is like hearing him from beyond the grave. It's always a nice time. I didn't get it from any member of my family. No one in my family was interested in politics. Obviously they voted. Well, I say obviously not everyone votes. They did vote. But, they weren't particularly political. I've virtually changed all of my beliefs since childhood. Not everything, though, wasn't brought up by the Tories or Attila the Hun. No, I mean, it is good to revisit things that you may believe, because sometimes it's worth thinking, how do I believe that? Was it just something? Because you do ape as a child. You have to. It's the only way you're going to learn to walk, talk, or anything else. But there we go. But I mean, the bus service round here is pretty rubbish. If you're a young person round here and you need to get a job in one of the nearest towns, it's probably not happening. Unless the working hours are particularly in tune with, because there are buses, they're just quite infrequent. So really, a young person living where I am, you haven't really got much chance of getting a decent job unless you've got a car. Or any job. Doesn't have to be decent, just any job. It's very difficult. No one in my family was interested in politics, although they've always talked about it, and that even Ted Heath. An important thing is not the size of the raise in the pension, is how stable the economic climate is to support and sustain pensioners. That is absolutely vitally quite right. But it even goes beyond that, even in terms of the self. It's not just about your income, it's about your outgoings as well. Now, I know some of those outgoings are taken account of by inflation, and pensioners have had above inflation. The Tories have given pensioners above inflation increases. Labour did as well when they were last in power. I mean, everyone, the pensioners, the state pension always increases by more than inflation over a period of years. No party, Labour or the Conservatives, is going to, let pensioners struggle excessively. But I would argue that there are certain costs not included in inflation that are also a major factor. Like, for example, if you have to pay for some private services that would ordinarily be provided by the state, but the queue's just too long, like healthcare, for example, it's not the only one, then you may be paying out more on things that aren't taken account of in inflation. But there we go. Thoughts on Brexiteers downplaying the economic impact of Brexit by claiming Germany's in recession as a lower percentage growth. Well, it's not. It has, or is it now? Can't remember. But again, they keep picking up the thing on Germany. Is we know what happened in Germany. They've had 2 hits to their economy, not counting COVID. Everyone had a COVID hit. In around about 2015, 2016, that was Dieselgate. That was absolutely crushing to their economy. And second, more recently, Nord Stream 2. They made a very poor choice in being dependent on fuels from Russia when Putin was very clearly minded to invade Europe. So entirely their own fault. Entirely their own fault. But the thing is, they can't do it across the Europe in general. They keep having to. What they'll do, and what they will always do, is they'll use an exit, because someone at some point will go into recession, right? Because all recession is when your economy might have been doing really well, and then it doesn't do quite so well. Well, if it does that for 6 months in a row, then it's recession. So you can still be doing better, and Germany's economy is still doing better than ours. In fact, there was another recent chart in Financial Times showing that You know, in terms of trade, we are the only G7 nation whose trade has still not picked up in real terms. Brexiteers keep pushing out, because in response to one, in fact, I think I've still got it here. There was this Financial Times chart, but they've done other ones as well recently. And they decided to try and counter it by putting up total trade, because this is just trading goods, right? And we are a service economy. So they tried doing it in terms of total trade, but they did it in monetary value. And remember, you know, the value of the pound in 2017 was higher than it is in 2023. So they weren't doing it in real terms. And even then, their graph didn't show an increase in trade. Their graph showed that our trade was no better than it was since before Brexit. And that's the best they can do at the moment, show it's no better. But when you say do it in real terms, volumes is best. Do quantities of trade. But at the very least, if you're going to do it in pounds, you've got to take account of inflation. Must do. And then all of a sudden it's down. It's utterly ridiculous to suppose that our trade could have improved by raising trade barriers. Absolute madness. There's a photo of a couple on bargain hunt celebrating like they've won the lottery because they ended up with a £2 profit. I think the Tories thought that's how the public would react to the budget. I do as well. This is, again, it's a problem. There's always an extent to which any senior MP is not going to live the life of ordinary struggling people, right? Even in Labour. You can have someone like Angela Rayner who will have known the struggle. She will have known it in her past, but she doesn't now. She's well off now. She's comfortable now, so she's fine. She may talk still to people, but she doesn't live that life, and nor does any senior Labour MP. The only ones who possibly would be the ones like Nadia Whittome, for example, who's only just become an MP and rather foolishly, I think, gave away all her money. Those are the only ones who will know struggle. But there's a difference between people who don't experience the problems themselves but are aware of them, and the Tories just not aware of them, and they've never been aware of them. You know, most Conservatives in the cabinet, most of the policymakers, whether it be the actual MPs or whether it be their paid advisors, they've all come from wealthy backgrounds. They all got themselves jobs. I mean, think about the job of a political advisor. It's just to talk, isn't it? It's just to do what I do, talk shit at a camera, except they talk shit at a prime minister. It's the same thing. You know, some of them will do a lot of research and they'll come up with good advice. Some of them will just make stuff up. You know, they'll just make something up that fits with their worldview. They're getting paid a fortune, and some of them don't do any work for it. They just go, they just imagine the way the world is, or they just look at some data and go, oh, well, it shows this. It's like, well, no, it doesn't. So they're completely removed. They have no idea. Have Labour said what they do about military yet? No, I don't think so. I don't think you would expect Labour, unless they are properly pushed, to say what they're going. They must know themselves what they're going to do. The only thing, no, I actually don't know. I was going to say that I don't know, in all honesty, and I don't think unless someone really pushes them, they're going to say, because why would they? Because it's in a mess. The thing is, everything's in a mess. It's not even like Labour. If it were a situation where the Conservatives were maybe bloating certain government departments, like defence, say, then Labour could say, well, you know, we don't need all that. We can scale it. But everything's been cut to the bone. And it's not like, ordinarily you might say, well, maybe defence can wait a bit, but it can't, because we actually need it. We need it. But it's but yeah, I've not seen any positive policies on that, and I would not expect Labour to, and I also don't expect the media to, because if the media start pushing Labour for what their specific policies are, their detailed policies on defence, they have to face up to the fact that the Tories have left us with a completely hollowed out military. So I imagine most of the mainstream media will just basically agree to be quiet on that one. Very difficult if you're successful to live in poverty. I mean, there's a few lottery winners who've managed it. But yes, one of the motivations to get out of poverty, because you know about it, is you never forget though. No, indeed, but you will. I mean, like, I haven't been in poverty for a long time. I haven't. I have. But I still can't say I know what it's like now, because I don't just mean because of like time. People on the breadline are much worse off now. I don't know how people cope. I genuinely don't know how people cope. I struggled. I had to keep letting things like the electricity go off and the phone go off and stuff like that, because I had to pay bills not when they came, but when I had to, when I needed them, because I just didn't have enough money. It was constantly juggling. So I remember that, and I remember having to sacrifice heating. I couldn't have any heating, no hot water, no heating in the house, because as far as I was concerned, that was a luxury that I could not afford. So I remember that, but I don't know what it would be like now, and I wouldn't want to experience it now because it's much worse. So I don't actually know what it's like now. Cannot possibly experience it, and hopefully never will, because it's horrible. Will Labour move the triple lock on pensions? I'm due to retire in the next 5 years. I doubt it very much. The thing is, whilst retired people are this massive voting bloc and generally vote on the same basic issues, no party is going to... Like I say, under Labour last time, the state pension increased above the rate of inflation, as well as they had better public services. That will happen under this Labour government as well. Although they're not totally committed to the triple lock itself, I don't know what will be in the manifesto. Will there be a commitment? There may not be a commitment to the triple lock. There may or may not. But what I would suggest is, in the long term, I would certainly expect above inflation increase in the state pension, because it would be mad not to. But at the same time, going back to that earlier comment, you do have to sort out how you deal with an increasingly retired population, particularly when you've got a lot of anti-immigration rhetoric in the news. Uncle Social saying, I was raised in poverty, I've worked for social services for years. Seen so much poverty, it reminds me of my roots. Yeah, I mean, my partner had a very, I mean, didn't even have shoes a lot of the time, sugar sandwiches type thing, like living. I didn't. I had, my parents were very well off, so I didn't experience any poverty at all until I was an adult and messing up on my own. And even then, it was time limited. Can we get the steelworks back, say, by nationalisation? So the way I look at it is anything that fails under the Tories, they will throw money at it to keep it privatised. Whereas with Labour, they're much more likely to go, look, if it's cheaper to nationalise, why wouldn't we nationalise it? I mean, remember in Italy some years ago, they took their largest steelworks, which is larger than either of ours. They took their largest steelworks into public hands for quite a few years to sort it out. They then did sell it off again, but the option was there to keep it. So what I would say is, in terms of any privatised public service, I don't see how Labour would, if it ever became cheaper to nationalise than to pay a private company to buy it, it's like keeps happening with the Tories, they'll nationalise it. But they're not going to spend a load of money just to nationalise something. It will have to be a situation where it's going to go bust unless something happens. But I would think it makes sense for Labour to say, well, if we're going to have to use public money anyway, we will take a controlling interest. I'm most expectant on water, actually, because water companies are basically getting ready to go bust. Now, with Labour in power, I would be much more hopeful of some sneaky nationalisation there. But we will just have to wait and see, because obviously there's no explicit policies on that. One Pagan saying it's from having learned how to live on not a lot for most of the 30 years I've been alive. This is also partly why I ended up in a progressive. Well, Indeed. I mean, it often baffles me why people who are struggling ever vote Conservative. Like, I can understand maybe it happening once in your life and then you go, oh no, this is terrible. You know, let's say you've grown up under a Labour government and you became dissatisfied and you thought, oh, I'll give the Tories a try. It's your first year voting. You don't know any different. You don't know what the Tories are like. So you vote Conservative, they win, and then you go, oh my God, no. I don't understand how after that point you vote Conservative again. That's what I don't understand. I mean, I was talking to Graham yesterday on the agenda. You know, you have this term that's used as a term of an offence, champagne socialist. And I'm thinking, why is that a term of offence? Because a champagne socialist, the meaning of that is it's someone who's well off, who well, either supports socialism in general, or if it's party politics, supports Labour. And it's like, well, isn't that a good thing? Because these are people who don't need it. They're well off under either system, yet they choose to support a system that benefits more people. That's a selfless act. Why would you ridicule for someone? And the ridicule doesn't come from Tories. It's not Tories calling them this. It's people in Labour. I'm thinking, why are you using that as a term of offence? Whereas you can understand someone who's in poverty or hovering around the poverty line, if they're at all aware, self-aware, then of course they're going to more likely vote, well, should we say against the Conservatives? Depends who you'd vote, depends which constituency you're in, right? But you will certainly go on to vote against the Conservatives, because it'd be mad to vote for more poverty, wouldn't it? Who votes for more poverty? I mean, lots of people do, but they don't mean to. Rather hopeful of a UK National Wealth Fund did good for Norway. I keep saying, I will say it until I'm blue in the face and beyond. When we're looking for how to build an economy, we should look immediately to our east. There are several countries in Northern Europe right next to us who all have very successful systems of government and economies. And yeah, Denmark, another very good one. People, oh, high cost of living. Yeah, but everyone gets paid really well, and you get paid as a student. I don't just mean a grant, you get paid as a student. And, you know, and there's a reason why everyone's really happy there. But there we go. Anyway, we'll have to leave it there. I'm afraid we've run out of time. Thanks very much for coming on, everyone. Have a very good evening. And until next time, I'll see you later.